Hello, I'm Mary Phaeton. Welcome to Cover to Cover. The show is presented by Writing WA, and it's our opportunity to meet a West Australian author and hear all about their latest book. My guest today is David Whish-Wilson to talk about his latest novel, Old Scores. Thanks for being here, David.
Cheers, Mary.
Now, this is the third in a series. The main character, Frank Swann, we've met in the first book, Line of Sight, which was set in 76, and then Zero at the Bone, set in 79. So at the beginning of Old Scores, we're in the heady days of the 80s. Where do we find Frank? What's happening in his life?
Well, Frank started off as he's an ex-policeman, and he had quite a senior rank in the police force. But after the murder of a brothel madam, he became a whistleblower, and he was soon kind of boarded out of the force. So since then he's been making a living as a pretty, a low-rent private investigator. He just takes jobs where he can. He's started to specialise, which is based on a real private investigator I know. He started to take on jobs trying to recover money for people who have been ripped off in share market scams, which was a thing from the period. The stock market was a lot more unregulated. So. But of course, some of the people who are running the share market scams are ex-criminals, so it's a little bit dodgy. So he's had a couple of wins. He's just been paid for a big job, but he's looking for a safer harbour, I guess, when the novel starts.
Now, given that we have met him in those two previous books, do you feel that it's essential reading to have those before you step into Old Scores?
No, I think it's definitely written to be read as a standalone. You could read it without having read the early ones. It certainly wouldn't hurt to know a little bit of the backstory, but it's its own period. A lot of new characters, and do that little kind of foundational work in the first couple of chapters for those who haven't met Frank Swann and his family before. Yeah. So you can certainly read it as a standalone. Yeah.
Perth is so vividly portrayed in this book, and I guess that's partly because of your deep knowledge of Perth from your book Perth from the New South series. But it's a character in this book in itself. What did you need to find out about the sense of Perth in the 80s that you didn't already know, that wouldn't just flow off the pen for you when you were writing this story?
I suppose I was building on the earlier novels as well in that regard. Of course, the 80s is notorious now for the WA Inc. period. So I was working with familiar kind of ground, and some of those kind of entrepreneurial, slightly reptilian characters were there in the earlier novels, but they've really they've kind of reached their ascendancy now. They have the ear of the Premier. They're doing very well. Credit is cheap internationally, so they're able to borrow lots of money. But I'm still working around something that it was quite a key quote for me when I was starting writing the crime fiction, and it was the quote was, from poet Dorothy Hewitt, West Australian poet Dorothy Hewitt. She said, "Perth's air of manufactured innocence is actually the perfect field for corruption." So she was comparing that to Sydney, the kind of the glitz and the glamour, King's Cross. People are used to seeing shady characters and shady operations, whereas people in Perth aren't used to seeing that. So these guys could kind of operate in plain sight and get away with all kinds of things. So of course the thing about the WA Inc. period is that the mask behind which these guys operated slipped for a little while, and we were able to see what was going on behind the scenes before it was put back on, I guess.
So would you say that any of the characters in this setup with this background would be easily pinpointable as being a certain real life character in the WA Inc. scene?
Not necessarily. I mean, people may see people who they believe are real people, but I tend to fictionalise my characters, even if I use a real context, real setting, and what have you. I've always liked a quote from American writer Flannery O'Connor. She said about her own work, the truth isn't distorted, but distortion is used to get at the truth. So I create kind of archetypical characters. So my shady entrepreneurs here are archetypical shady entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily based on real people, although they may have some characteristics that we associate with certain people.
What about remembering the look and feel of Perth in the 80s? Because having been there, I felt that you captured that really well.
Yeah, well, it's a trope of crime fiction that the setting or the place is foregrounded. And I think particularly with Perth, I mean, on the one hand, I love Perth, so it's important to me that I represent it in a way that it is in service of the story, but it also allows me as a writer to be a little bit more lyrical in certain passages when I'm, describing the light, the hills, the river, something like that. Given that so much of the story is using clipped, kind of hyper-masculine language and what have you, allows me to do that. But it's also important, I think, because knowing the book is going to be released around Australia and internationally read as well. Not many people, I guess, in Auckland, Hobart, Cairns, New York, London have been to Perth, so I think as a writer I need to work a little bit harder to show what the place is like. But also, setting in crime fiction is all about atmosphere and tone, and going back to that Dorothy Hewitt quote, I try and set up a kind of a contrast between what on the surface is a nice, calm, beautiful, so there's lots of descriptions of the river on a beautiful day and that kind of thing. Not that kind of moody atmospherics you associate with, Scandinavian crime or British crime. So there's a contrast between the clear light and the beautiful days and the calm river with actually what's going on behind the kind of the facade of that peace and quiet and calm.
I want to go back to that Dorothy Hewitt quote too, because you mentioned manufactured innocence, and I'm curious to know what kind of stick you've got from people who've read the book about I guess holding a mirror to the dark underbelly of what was going on at that time, and B, kind of shattering therefore the illusion that we're as innocent as we appear.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides to that. I mean, by and large, I get really good feedback from people. I get a lot more kind of positive comments saying, "Thank God, finally someone's talking about this. I didn't think anyone was ever going to do it," and that's because the research I do. I want to use as many true stories about Perth as I can. The kind of stories you don't get in history books and that kind of thing. So by and large, the feedback it's very positive. At the same time, when the first book came out, there was a little bit of blowback. Actually, while doing the research for the story, word obviously got out that I was writing a book about the corrupt coterie of detectives who ran organised crime in Western Australia. Not many people know that, and it's a kind of surprise to hear it. And so sometimes I get contacted by readers saying, "Oh, gee, I really didn't know that. I didn't know that kind of thing happened in Perth." But it wasn't just happening in Perth; it was happening in Queensland. It was a kind of a pragmatic way for the police service to keep an eye on what was going on, but of course it allowed for a lot of corruption, I guess. Sometimes, so there was a little bit of stick when the first novel came out. I had my offices at work and my home office broken into, and nothing stolen, just stuff strewn around the place. A little bit of message, threatening phone calls. I had a guy park across, the guy who most people think murdered Shirley Finn, who my brothel madam Ruby Devine is based on. He parked across from my house for a few hours and I just kept an eye on him. And then after the last one, I had a quiet word from someone from the, I suppose you'd say, the Sicilian organised crime community. Took me aside and said, "You've got to stop writing about us." And I think that was basically the result of someone seeing themselves in the story that actually wasn't in the story. That I know that can happen. So I definitely don't go out trying to represent real people. It's not my intention to defame anybody, but that's the nature of fiction. Sometimes people will see themselves.
But what did it feel like then especially being watched, having your office turned over, did it make you doubt that you would proceed writing crime fiction based in Perth, for example?
Well, it was, I guess the best way to describe it was quite a lonely experience, because apart from the break-ins, the couple of other things where I had face-to-face contact, nothing actually illegal was done, so there was quite clever intimidation. So I couldn't really complain to the police, so I felt like I was kind of on my own. But I was working with a private investigator I knew, and he's quite a colourful character. And his house has been firebombed and his car's been blown up, and so I went to him and I asked for his advice, and he said, "Look, it'll be fine. These guys will be angry, but they'll just in the end they'll just say it's a work of fiction. It's not." So I took his advice and just kind of went ahead and did it. But also, you know, I'm a reasonably stubborn person, and because these things were happening, it made me actually want to do it more rather than less.
It's interesting to me that these things have happened to you, because you've told me before that you were quite interested in how people respond in extreme situations. So to actually have some of these things happen to you, they're not really extreme in terms of criminal experience, but they're still distressing.
Yeah, they certainly kind of give you pause, I guess. You know, the first novel, Line of Sight, was I felt like I was kind of working for the Finn family. I was working with Shane Finn, so that was an even greater kind of impetus for me to kind of keep going. But yeah, it's certainly strange when you are, the material you're writing is matched with some of the anxiety going on in your own personal life as well. That was quite an interesting experience. Old School's less so. It's more about, you know, the background. It's more about some of the same kind of key characters, but there's less of that kind of close. I suppose one way to describe it is, you know, if the first novel started off on street level, police corruption and street level crime, and the next one looked at some of the shady stuff going on in boardrooms. This one is on a larger scale. So we're looking at some of the shadiness going on in the political sphere and the larger business sphere, rather than down on the street level where people still operate quite, you know, in the same way they always have, I guess.
And I guess with the amount of stuff that was on the record about WA Inc., you didn't have to do as much private digging.
That's right.
That might have upset people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you've talked about your private investigator, but I guess a lot of the research that you had to do was around having conversations with people just to get some colour on you know, the times and the experiences. What kinds of things did you have to? What kinds of conversations did you have by way of research?
Well, this is the part of crime writing I love. I mean, I love writing, and I love writing fiction most of all, but in you know, wearing some of my other hats, I write academic articles and journal articles and that kind of thing. Totally different kind of research. So I love the research I do for writing crime fiction in Perth, because it's basically just going around and sitting at someone's kitchen table, or meeting someone in the pub or in a cafe and just saying, "Tell me your stories. I'm really interested in this period. What can you tell me about this?" Nothing on the record, and so I've gotten a reasonably nice group of people. I can keep going if I want to check something about the police service, I want to check something about prostitution, I want to check something about the drug area. I can keep going back to these people and ask them, which is important because you want to get some of the details right. And I was still quite young when a lot of this was happening, so it's not from necessarily from personal memory, but I still go back to those same people and I say, "Look, can you tell me? You know, you were a journalist at this time. What was going on with this particular, you know, side of the story?" And it's good fun.
So when you're writing, would you necessarily get to a point where you'd be so stuck that you'd have to pick up the phone and make an appointment to have a conversation as soon as possible so you could proceed with your writing?
No, I tend to just to write, and then I go back if I identify something as a little bit faulty or something I'm a little bit unsure of. Then I'll go and kind of fact check it with someone who knows the facts, and some of it is to do with the kind of the criminal element, and some of it is just to do with you know, the music, the clothes people wore, and all of that kind of thing. And
yeah.
I mean, I love a lot of the stuff from the period, the cars and the music and what have you. So.
And a couple of times you actually detail the items in news reports. That, you know, down to what was actually happening in Perth at the time. So did that take a particular sort of Batty Library type research, or was that just off the top of your head too?
Yeah, that was mainly off the top of the head. Some of the stuff I remember, and some of the stories are, you know, so the stories like the Porsche boy, the boy who was stealing Porsches. I mean, it's an interesting period for me because it was kind of the last heyday of the bank robber, and a lot of I still remember a lot of the things were on the news report. It seemed like every night on the TV news there was another bank robbery, and the Porsche Boy was a story. So it wasn't too much of a stretch to go back and think of what was going on at the time.
Yeah, it felt almost the last days of the Wild West.
Yeah.
A little bit. And one of the other things that stood out for me was your understanding of, I guess, the machinations of the hierarchy inside the prison system and how that worked. And that's from your experience teaching poetry in prisons?
Yeah, I taught a poetry class at Casuarina Prison for several years, and it was like one afternoon a week, and that was good. I had a lot of guys in my class who were there for the whole, duration of the teaching period, and they were mostly lifers. They're mostly guys doing long prison sentences, and a lot of them were kind of great storytellers. I was always told that in the prison hierarchy, speaking of hierarchies, the storyteller is up the top, because someone who can entertain a group of people, whether that's telling jokes or telling stories, it's quite an important attribute to have in a situation where people are locked or in a confined space. So I was lucky enough to have lots of really great storytellers in my class, and so I tend not to use their stories directly, because that's kind of like an appropriation, but just getting an idea of the way the prison system worked. And I used to see it of myself in a very small way when I used to go in and out and what have you. So,
What were the challenges for you of writing a third book featuring the main character of Frank Swann?
I was lucky, I guess. The main problem I would anticipate, if this, with series, is becoming a little bit jaded with the characters, but I don't feel like that at all. I still feel like one of the things going around and talking to some of Perth's great storytellers, one thing that is continually reinforced is how many great stories there are out there that haven't been told yet, and I kind of use that as a motivation. And so I came back to write old scores with a lot of enthusiasm, rather than the feeling of, oh, here we go again, same characters, similar period. And a book is 70, 80,000 words. You can only fit so many stories in there, and all of the stories have to work in the service of the coherent narrative. So there are always going to be stories that haven't been told, and there's still plenty more stories.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm really interested in asking you about your writing practice, because it begins with practically no plan at all. What did you have? What were the nuggets of what you started Old Scores with?
Yeah, good question. I knew it was the period. I just chose a kind of a year at random, the mid-80s, so I knew some of the background stories. I knew some of the things going on in the news, and I knew I wanted to look at that kind of area, the kind of the bigger picture, I suppose, rather than, like I said, the street level stuff. But I didn't really know which characters I was going to use, and I like working that way. So the very first chapter starts off with a boy breaking out of prison, and when I sat down to start the novel, I didn't actually know that he was going to be a character. I just started, and...
You started with chapter 1, as it turns out?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I thought that was quite good fun. So I know there's a bit of a trajectory. A kid's just broken out of jail. There's one kind of story strand. And I thought about some of the bank robbers I met when I was teaching in jail. And I had a bank robber in my last novel as well. And because this is the last kind of glory years of the bank robbers, I wanted to include a particular guy who's come back to Perth to protect his mother, strangely enough. He's wanted in 4 states, but he's come back to Perth, so his motivations aren't necessarily that he's come back to do...
Not for revenge or...
Yeah, that's right. He's come back to protect his mother. So that was just completely off the cuff as well. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with Frank? I think I'll try and integrate him somehow into the political machinery. And so by the end of the 3rd chapter, I had 3 different characters, but I still had absolutely no idea where the story was going to go. But that's how I like to write. I'm a terrible planner, I'm very disorganised. But the greatest pleasure, I love writing. The greatest pleasure for me is actually not knowing where a story is going to go. It has its downside. It can be a little bit wasteful, but I like going there each day and just working things out, seeing some things don't always work, but it's a great feeling when suddenly out of nothing you realise you've got, oh, here's the story. With a braided narrative, I always use 2 or 3 characters, and there are points, of course, when I'm halfway through, 2/3 of the way through, I'm still thinking, how the hell am I going to do this, you know? But it always seems to come together in some way. So, and then when it does, it's a great feeling.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was interested also in the fact that this book maintains a consistent and quite fast pace, and I'm interested in where that happens in the process, whether you're able to write at that pace, or, as you said, perhaps maybe not, because this way of writing can be quite wasteful, but or is it in the editing process, and does it need to be read aloud for you to get a real sense of it? And how do you achieve that?
Yeah, well, with this one, that was one thing I did know I wanted to work with. So I set myself a little challenge. With this novel, I wanted to write it in a kind of an up-tempo tone or beat. I wanted to write it fast, and I also wanted the pace of the novel to be faster than my previous 2, just as an exercise for my own kind of entertainment, to see if I could do it. When as a writer, I feel like I'm always learning, and I wanted to. One of the great things about writing crime fiction, because I've done all other kinds of writing as well. One of the great things about crime fiction is working with readers' expectations, but also trying to say something new, hopefully, and within that, trying to find a way to entertain myself. And so, specifically this one, I wanted to write it so that the pace was a little bit faster than previous novels, without it being kind of relentless and one-dimensionally paced. And yeah, it was an interesting exercise, and it was quite good fun. You know?
The culmination of the book, I guess, the pace picked up. It felt for me that the pace picked up at that point, and as I was reading it, because it is very exciting, I was imagining you kind of, with sweat on your brow, almost not able to type as fast as you were thinking about, how all of this would come together, because there are a lot of loose ends to tie up. What was the experience actually like?
It's for me, it's quite a joyous experience, where you see, there's that old writing metaphor of in the early stages of the novel, you're stumbling around in a darkened room. There's furniture there, but you don't really know what it is and how it fits in. And then suddenly, at the end of the novel, the light goes on and you see everything is in its place. And it's a little bit like that. Things suddenly become clear. And that is one of the really joyous parts I find about writing. I've been doing it long enough now to know that there's a certain point when you're working in long-form fiction where it's very stressful, but it's a nice kind of stress, and that is you've got all of this going on in your head. You're basically carrying the novel in your head, and you also realise that there's a part of your mind that is always working, even when you're asleep. Often you wake up in the morning and you found the solution to a problem that. The answer to a question you didn't even know you'd asked, but somehow, while you're asleep, your brain's been kind of working. And so it's kind of a frenetic, highly stressful, can be emotionally tricky time, but it's great when it all comes together, because suddenly little light bulbs start flashing on and everything kind of comes together. And it's a mysterious process, but writing for me is always about balancing anxiety with trust, and I kind of trust myself now. Things don't always work, but I trust myself to know that if I'm there and I'm thinking about it, something will work. The mind is quite amazing like that. So,
because there were so many threads to pull together, have you become an expert at managing to pull them all together yourself, or does it take the people close to you who read it for you to say, but you forgot that detail?
Yeah, no, it's I can't remember a time where I've left a loose thread and someone said, "Hang on, that story is a dead end." I think, yeah, my mind, and that's probably something that comes out in the editing process as well. I might read back a draft and think, okay, you probably need to integrate that aspect of the story a little bit better. But no, I think basically by the end of the writing process, you're carrying all these characters and all these story strands in your mind. And they just somehow find a way to resolve themselves, because you're thinking about it all the time. You can't write long form fiction without inhabiting the fictional world and living with it 24 hours a day. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. And so somehow I might be having a coffee or taking the dog for a walk, dropping my kids off at school, but I'll go, oh, yeah, okay, it'll just flash into view.
And when I get there, I'll, yeah. So once, say at the stage that you're at now with the book, where it's finished, it's published, you're starting to talk about it publicly, do you take time off from writing, or is it such a regular practice that you just keep going?
Yeah, no, I tend to just keep going. It's something I feel like I've always needed to do. I've just finished another draft of a novel, so that's sitting there. So I haven't done any writing for 2 weeks, which is quite unusual for me. But I can already feel that kind of a frustration building up. So I've got a few ideas for things. I'm always there at my desk. I mean, I'm balancing writing with full-time work and looking after children, etc. But I'm always there in the morning, kind of psychologically anyway. Even if I'm at work, I might just start taking notes for something. But like I say, what you realise after you've been doing it for a while is you're always writing, even when you're not writing. So I'll get back to it as soon as I can, which won't be very far away.
And when you do sit down, you'll be starting something from scratch?
Yes, starting something from scratch.
Very exciting.
With very little idea of where it's going to go.
Now, I always like to ask the authors who come to talk to me on Cover to Cover about a West Australian book that they recommend. And you've recommended a book I haven't read before, but I'm keen to. Tell me about what you're recommending. I'm
recommending Shadow Lines by Stephen Kinane. It's been out for a while, but it's possibly it's my favourite book about Perth for a start. When I was doing the research for the Perth book in the New South series, I mean, one way I did my research was to go out and read everything that I could find that had ever been set in Perth, watch every movie, listen to every song, and go out and talk to people. So I talked to lots of people in the Nyungar community. I said, well, what are the important stories for you? And they almost universally said the Fanny Balbuck story. But I hadn't read Shadow Lines, but a good friend of mine said, look, you've really got to read this. And I just inhaled it. So it's the story of Stephen's family. So it's a very personal story. It's the story of his grandmother, Jessie Argyle, who was taken from, Stephen's a Mirrawong man, taken from up near Kununurra and put on the missions down here, sent out to work for peanuts. So it was during the time of A.O. Neville's tenure. It's also the story of his English grandfather, Edward Smith, who just arrived on the boat and started working in the wheat belt and a number of other jobs. And it's a love story, basically. It's the story of how those two people managed to maintain their relationship despite and in the face of this really quite terrible regime that was, actively discouraged black and white people coming together. But they managed to do it. But at the same time, it's also a story of Perth from about 1915 and up until when Stephen was growing up in East Perth. So it's about resilience. It's a love story, and it's about it's a kind of an alternate history of Perth as well, from a really interesting perspective. It's a beautiful book.
That's a very solid recommendation, Stephen Kinane's Shadow Lines.
That's right,
yeah. David, thank you so much for coming to talk to me today, and thank you so much for writing Old Scores. It's a fantastic read. I reckon a pure indulgence would be to sit down and read it from cover to cover, maybe on the holidays if you had the chance to do that. It really is so enjoyable. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me along, Mary.
All the books we feature on Cover to Cover are recommended for book clubs because we think they'll generate great discussions. Writing WA has created book club notes for each of them, and you can download them. We know that many of you don't have a local bookshop where you can buy the books we discuss on the show, so we've made a special arrangement with Crow Books in Perth. Place your order with Crow Books by phone, mention the code Cover to Cover, and you'll get the postage free. Next month on Cover to Cover, I'll be joined by two guests to discuss the graphic novel Small Things. Many of you will know that the book's creator, Mel Tregonning, died in 2014. So joining me to discuss this beautiful and heartbreaking book are her sister Violet Tregonning and illustrator James Foley. We love receiving your feedback about Cover to Cover. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please email us at info@writingwa.org. Thank you for joining me again this month. If you have writers in your communities in need of support or advice, then please encourage them to look through the information on Writing WA's website, to follow us on Facebook, or to get in touch with us. Enjoy reading local, and I look forward to your company next month on Cover to Cover.